Thank you very much for coming and for this interesting session on a Sunday afternoon here in Minneapolis. I'm going to be following up on actually Ala's presentation. I'll be focusing on some of our most recent research, and it was a big multidisciplinary project. I'll be discussing today just a single aspect of the project, and in particular, the network economics of cybercrime with applications to financial services. My colleagues who have worked on this with me are Professor Wayne Burleson from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at UMass, Professor Mila Sherman from the Department of Finance, my colleague from my own department, Operations and Information Management, Professor Senay Solak, and we actually had someone from the Office of Information Technology, Chris Misra, also from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Now, this was actually a funded project by a consortium known as the Advanced Cybersecurity Center. It's based in Boston, and it's a group of universities, a group of firms, including financial services firms, consultants, and so on. And it was a project that lasted actually a full year, and then we got another extension because we're interested in following up. Now, this is just a project synopsis. I'm just going to be focusing on the network economics modeling. We had a certain vision of the project, which was very, very multidisciplinary. We wanted to bring in kind of the best from finance and systemic risk in terms of network modeling, even in terms of portfolio optimization, and to try and synthesize different kind of domains and see if we could come up with something new. Okay, and we think we did. Okay, we think we did something interesting. I thought it was a very, very challenging project. So I'll give you a lot of the background and motivation so you know where our intellectual history is coming from. I'll be focusing on financial networks and also some of the background on the internet. I'll discuss the network economic modeling, and also I'll be doing a little bit in terms of examples. I'll talk about the size of the problems that we've actually computed, and I'll be summarizing and concluding, and talk probably also about some of the directions for future research, of which we have quite a lot. Now, we all know that the internet has transformed the way we conduct our daily activities. It's transformed the way we conduct our economics and social activities. And where would we be without the internet? And the internet has blossomed, okay, over the past couple of years. We see a doubling and even greater than doubling on the average in various parts of the world, in Asia, in Africa, and in the Middle East. And the demand for the internet continues to grow. In fact, this project is an entree into another project which we have, which is a big National Science Foundation grant. We're one of 5 teams in the US working on the future internet architecture. So whatever we learn in terms of cybersecurity will also be very important when it comes to kind of redesigning the internet. And there we're using a lot of operations research and network economics techniques as well, combined with computer science and electrical engineering and so forth. Now, the advances in information technology and globalization have also changed the world in terms of financial transactions, and that's something really, really important, okay? The financial system now is really a complex network. It's a global network. So if we really want to capture, even when it comes to the cybersecurity aspects, the hacking, the cybercrime aspects, you have to be studying financial systems as network systems. I think that's really, really critical. And just recently, I saw my colleague from MIT, Yossi Sheffi, at a conference in Zurich, Switzerland, which was appropriately on vulnerability and resilience of supply chains. It was a wonderful, wonderful conference just 2 weeks ago. And he's the author of the best-selling book, The Resilient Enterprise, published in 2005. And he was talking about the interconnectedness of globalization, the kinds of impacts and so forth, and we can have seemingly unrelated consequences. What is local can actually have global impacts, and because of the connectivity. Okay, that's extremely, extremely important. Now, our grant and our project was funded primarily by financial services firms. Okay, and that made for some very interesting data acquisition issues and discussion issues and sharing of information and so forth. And I think this sector of the economy has been especially affected by the recession and also by cyber attacks. So they've really suffered from a double whammy over the past couple of years. Okay. And we know what happened in 2008 and 2009 with our global financial crisis, with banks closing, such as Lehman, and the financial impacts propagating globally, with one of my favorite countries, Iceland, almost brought to the tip of bankruptcy, which is really, really bad. Okay? So it's very, very important for us to be talking about these financial systems and even financial service systems as networks. Okay? It's not just a single decision maker working in isolation. Is what one person does, one organization does, can have global kinds of ramifications. So we have to capture kind of the network effects. And I would say that financial networks are one of the critical infrastructure systems actually in the modern society. Ala talked about cyber-physical systems, the electrical power grids, smart grids, and so forth. Well, financial networks are critical infrastructure systems. And in fact, I would say that it's our community in operations research and management science which was one of the first to really talk about financial networks as systems. We know Harry Markowitz, for example, who is renowned and the Nobel Prize winner for portfolio optimization. His classical portfolio optimization problem was a network problem. But if you think about all these different investors and so forth, and banks and financial intermediaries and so forth, it's a much, much more complicated network. These are some of the more recent papers and activities actually in our area in terms of financial networks, talking about graphs, talking about vulnerability, and all sorts of applications. Just recently, it was published in June, I edited a special double volume issue of our Journal of Computational Management Science, which brought together academicians, practitioners, bankers, actually from Europe, from Mexico, to kind of discuss issues and research systemic risk, financial vulnerability, and so forth. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful issue, so I'm plugging it, okay? But financial networks we've been writing about, not just in the new millennium. Actually, the first financial networks book I ever wrote was published in 1997 by Springer. And it was co-authored by a former student of mine who has that Midas touch. Okay? He's now managing a fund of funds in London, Dr. Stavros Tsiolkos. And at that point, the finance community really didn't appreciate, I think, financial systems as networks. It took something like the huge recession, the global crisis, and now my finance colleagues, even at MIT, say we should have studied that sooner, okay? And so maybe if we had identified the most important nodes, the most important links in their connectivity, we could have been able to do something before we had the crisis, okay? And so it's complexity. And this is something interesting too with one of the colleagues on our project, Professor Sherman. She's been working on complex networks and financial network vulnerability, focusing really on the empirical side. And they have found that the connections actually increase prior to kind of financial disasters such as the recession and during, okay? So you can see people are really, there are lots of financial flows. So obviously when you think about these kinds of issues and you're a hacker, you're trying to figure out, okay, where can you make the biggest impact, okay? This is kind of a map. You can see who's connected to whom and the size of the flows based on the size of the edges and so forth. Okay, but interestingly enough, so we've done a lot of work on network modeling, even using data for like the entire US in terms of rebalancing financial accounts for the Federal Reserve. But which kinds of measures should we use to identify which are the most important nodes and links? Okay, that's something which we became very, very interested in terms of critical infrastructure vulnerability, beginning with transportation and logistical networks, and then supply chain networks, and now financial networks. And with a former student of mine, actually, Patrick Chung, we developed a methodology to identify the most important nodes and links. Okay, in financial network systems, and you could have electronic transactions there, you could have financial intermediaries, and it had to do with determining if which node would make the greatest impact in terms of financial loss to the economy if it were to be disrupted. Okay, so if you're a hacker, you can think about, aha, that has the biggest impact on the economy, that can also have the biggest positive gain for me. Okay, usually I work on good networks, okay, positive networks. This is my first kind of entree into deviant networks, okay, but it's really, really fascinating, okay? So cybercrime and network economics, okay? In doing a lot of this research, obviously you read a lot of case studies, you deal with a lot of practitioners and so forth. We see that there's a great increase in cybercrime. It's affecting small organizations as well as large organizations. On the average, organizations can lose millions of dollars a year because of cybercrime, okay, and cyber attacks, okay, and that's big. Okay. And it does depend on the organizational size, but really no organization is immune if you're connected to the internet. And how do you do business in this day and age if you're not connected, right, to the internet? So this is really, really challenging, okay? And think about this. Years ago, right, when we had the Wild West and so forth, you'd have lots of bank robbers, right? Robbers know where to get money. You go to the banks. Okay, so now we have the cybercrime and the hackers and so forth. So which are the most vulnerable kinds of organizations? Okay, they're the ones that have the interesting data and also the money. Okay, so we have, for example, the Defense Department has been attacked the most. Offices, for example, energy and utility companies, they have something that others want. And of course, where is the money? The financial services firms. Okay, these are the targets. So sorry to the retailers, the tourism bureaus and so forth, consumer products, okay, they actually don't get hacked into as much. Okay. And now cybercrime is placing heavy, heavy strains on the financial sector, and they're struggling what to do. Okay, and this is something to have the inside information is very, very illuminating, but since this is being videotaped, we can talk off the records sometime. Okay. Now, this is something I thought this data was really interesting. Cybercrime is now accounting for 38% of all the economic crimes in the financial sector. Okay, which is huge. In other kinds of industries, it's only about 16%. So for them to be able to protect their data, their information, is extremely, extremely important. And another thing, which is also really, really important, is the company's reputation. Okay, I'll mention a little bit about information sharing and so forth. And working with financial services firms, they want to be able to share information because if, say, their competitor has been hacked into and attacked, maybe they can protect their assets. Okay, but then again, they're worried that maybe the information will get leaked out to investors and so forth and clients and say, oh, you should bring your money to this company, right, to this bank and so forth. We'll keep it safe. The other one, look what happens. You lose your information and so forth. So it's very, very tricky, okay? But the reputation is extremely, extremely important, and that's why they're really looking for different kinds of tools, methodologies to identify which of their systems are going to be attacked and why and how to try and avoid, okay? And it's also very, very costly. Okay. These are examples of the different kinds of attacks, denial of service, and actually stealing and threats, and there are many, many, many. And it's really the financial system, okay, that's the primary target, and it's quite vulnerable. Okay, I won't give you data. They're being attacked, even University of Massachusetts, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of times a day, sometimes thousands of attacks a day, okay, and universities such as MIT, okay, and so forth. Okay, so we're trying to kind of formulate these problems as networks, okay? And in dealing with the clients, we have to be able, I think a network approach is also very visually striking, and our clients kind of understand when they have pictorials, and there's, I think networks are, they're kind of pretty. We love networks and so forth. And they can kind of visualize, okay, who's attached to whom might be attacking whom, and you can see the connectedness and so forth. forth. So it's a very good of representing, I think, possible attacks. Okay? So I'm going to start talking about actually the model, okay, that we've done. Okay, and how we think about these problems. So we're getting into the mind of hackers. Okay, I'm going to assume that cyber criminals are rational agents. Okay, kind of a metaphor, I would say, would be drug dealers, okay, and so forth. So I'm thinking about like Jonathan Calkins' work and so forth. They're rational, okay? They have a certain supply. They have a certain product that they want, okay, being produced in certain parts of the region or the globe or so forth. But the thing is, they have to have consumers who actually demand their products. If you don't have any consumers, right, that demand the products, then why bother, right, manufacturing the drugs? Why run the risk of transporting the drugs? And the same thing with acquiring, say, these financial assets. You need a market for all those passwords, right, for the data and so forth and so on. Okay? If you have no market, then it makes no sense. You have higher transaction costs. So we're going to be doing a network economic model that actually builds upon our work in spatial price equilibria, which is really, really interesting because there we've applied these kind of network economics models to agriculture, to mineral economics, to energy economics, and so forth. And this is the first time we're actually applying it to a deviant network. Okay, but it has also been applied to financial services. So we're going to think of predators, for example, who are the hackers, and we're going to think about prey, okay, the animals that get eaten up in terms of like financial service organizations. Okay, so these hackers are going to be strategizing, trying to figure out whom they should attack, what are going to be kind of the price associated with attacking a certain financial services, because if you don't get caught, there's essentially like zero cost, okay? And also the transaction cost, okay? And this is important for policy making. If you make it harder to actually get okay, the information that you want, there's a higher risk, for example, maybe a higher punishment, then it might be too costly, so it makes no economic sense for them to go after a particular financial service. So you can see there are also all sorts of policy implications here and also investment implications. And then ultimately you need those consumers, okay? You need those who are willing to buy the credit card information from you and so forth. Okay, so you see there's a supply side, there's a demand side, there's a transaction side, and the commodities are these financial kind of products or financial information that's flowing, okay? And we can handle very, very large-scale problems. Also, in the transaction cost, you can think of it as a general cost that can also include, for example, risk. You can think of it, oh, the probability of getting caught, okay? Okay, so what are we going to determine? We're interested in determining kind of the flows in the network, okay, from the various financial service organizations to the points of demand, okay, that's where the hackers are going to be getting kind of the information and selling too, okay, so, and if they do not find demand markets, well, they don't, okay, so the model. Okay, networks. Think about topmost nodes. So those are essentially the preys, okay, the financial service firms. Then we have actually the hackers associated with the demand markets. And you have the trade flows, for example. So we have a typical financial service firm denoted by I. There are M of them. Typical demand market denoted by J. We're going to have SI denote the supply of the particular commodity or financial product at supply market I or firm I. We're going to have DJ denote the demand associated with that particular commodity at demand market J. Okay. And the commodity flows or shipments are going to be the QIJs, okay? And we're going to assume QIJ is non-negative, okay? It's the volume of like that transaction information that you want to get from I, okay? And you're going to be selling it at J. So what are going to be the network economic conditions, okay? 'Cause they're rational, okay? They're economic agents, okay? They're human beings, even if they're software agents and so forth, kind of, but they're implemented by human beings. So Qij star will be positive. You'll have a positive flow from a financial service firm I to demand market J. If the price associated with acquiring that financial product at I, or commodity, plus the transaction cost, Cij, is equal to the price, rho J, that the consumers are willing to pay. Okay, if the price that it costs you to get that information plus the transaction cost exceeds the price that you can recover for it, then you're going to have zero flow. You're not going to be stealing from it. It makes no economic sense. Okay. Plus, and also, but you can see how you can play around this with this from a policy perspective. If you have a much higher transaction cost, okay, then you can see they're not going to be trying to get at you. Or it's much higher to break in, like the supply price is high, then you're going to have zero flows and so forth. And also, if you can have the demand markets, like there's no demand market for that, okay, you can work on it maybe on that side as well, then you're going to have zero flows. Okay, this is elastic. Okay, I'll show you what the functions might, and we have conservation of flow equations. Besides the non-negative flows of the financial commodities, we also have the supply market I must be equal to the sum of the shipments to all the demand markets from the supply market I. Also, the demand at demand market J is equal to the sum of the commodity shipments from all the supply markets to that particular demand market. We have our feasible set K then. Okay, and what about the functions? We can handle very general functions. So say, and these are all vectors, say supply price at financial services firm I can in general depend upon the entire vector of supplies. Okay. The demand price also can depend upon the vector of demands, okay, at the various demand markets. And you can have a general transaction cost too that can depend upon all the different commodity shipments. Okay, so you can think about maybe investing on that side so you don't get the information or make it really hard to access or easier to catch them. Okay, now these equilibrium conditions actually we formulated in another application as a variational equality problem. Okay, variational equality problems are used to formulate a lot of game theory problems, all sorts of Nash equilibrium problems, and also spatial price equilibrium problems, transportation network problems, electric power, and others. So here, all those equilibrium conditions can be formulated as a single inequality. Okay, so we're interested in determining the vector of supplies, the vector of commodity shipments or trades, what's being hacked, and also the consumption amounts at the various demand points, such that that single inequality holds. Now we have certain qualitative properties because that's important. Okay, we want to make sure that we have reasonable conditions for existence of a solution. Do we have uniqueness of a solution? And actually, this variational equality has a really nice partitionability property. So we can, if we assume conditions on each of them separately, we can get assumptions holding for the entire variational equality. And under reasonable assumptions, like of strong monotonicity, we get both existence and uniqueness of a solution. Okay, if your problem is not strongly monotone, then you might have, say, multiple equilibria. And that's interesting, too. Okay? So existence. So let me just give you a simple example. But I'd like to say that we've solved problems on the scale of 250,000 variables. Okay, say 500 say financial services firms and 500 demand markets. And we've solved them even on computers with special architectures, like a second or two of CPU time. So very, very efficient. Okay, we've also done a lot of work on modeling the underlying dynamics of these processes, okay, from kind of an economic perspective. So let's consider two financial service firms and say two demand markets for the financial products. We can have linear or nonlinear asymmetric supply price functions, also transaction cost functions and demand price functions. Here we get the following equilibrium. We have numerous algorithms for solving these problems. Scalability isn't an issue, okay, because we really exploit the network structure, which is really fun. And you see, for example, that we have a zero flow. Okay, so Q2 1 is equal to 0. So the hackers at that demand market 1 are not going to get anything, okay, from that second financial service firm. So that's kind of interesting. And part of it is because the transaction cost is high. Okay, it doesn't make sense for them to even try and break in. Okay, and you see the kinds of answers that we can get. And then when we get the, say, equilibrium kind of supplies, the trade flows, and also the demands, then obviously from those we can get the incurred supply prices, the transaction costs, and the demand prices. And you can see that those spatial price equilibrium conditions hold like precisely, okay, very, very well. Okay, so firm 2 does not trade at all, or say the hackers at demand market 1 get no product from financial service 1. Now here I've just presented a single commodity model. We also have multiple commodity models because financial service firms have numerous kinds of products that, say, the hackers, the cyber criminals would want access to. That's kind of important. And we can actually model these kinds of problems by making copies of these single commodity kinds of problems. And we solve them also very, very efficiently. In addition, we've put all sorts of policy instruments in these, okay? Say if you have a supply price kind of floor, so it's really hard to get in, what happens? What if you have a demand price like ceiling, like consumers aren't willing to pay more than a certain amount for these stolen kind of financial products, okay? So let me summarize and conclude. Here we've given you kind of an overarching perspective of our project for the Advanced Cybersecurity Center with a focus on the network economic modeling. Other issues that members of our team have addressed and also we're continuing to address is that of systemic risk. We've also worked a lot on kind of R&D portfolio optimization, especially Professor Solak, trying to figure out, well, what kind of countermeasures should these financial service firms be investing in for safety and to protect their assets. Okay, the clients are financial services firms. I'm not going to be naming them, but they're very, very well known, who besides dealing with the recession have also been dealing with the cyber attacks. And let me tell you, the chief information officers lose a lot of sleep. Okay, I really, really respect these individuals. Okay. You don't have to put all your money under your mattress or pillow, but okay, sometimes that might be smart thing to do. Okay, so the model that we developed was a spatial price equilibrium model, and we've generalized it in many, many different ways. Okay, we have all sorts of algorithms and extensions, and this has been a very, very challenging project. It's not a typical project, but I think it's very useful. And it's important that more operations researchers, management scientists work in this problem domain because there's so much that needs to be done. This talk, actually, we posted already on the Super Network site for those of you who are interested in looking at it. And thank you for your attention.